And I think that might be the right number to go ahead and get started. We have a very busy town hall today. I'll kind of share my screen here and just give you an idea of what's to come. Here is our agenda for the day. We're going to have a welcome from Kathy Gallucci, a really interesting presentation on COVID research from Dr. Angela Branch, a financial update from folks here at UR. We'll do some new employee introductions and employee recognition, to share the exciting news about HR Connect, and then close. So I hope that we have enough time for all of that fun. I'm going to just toss it over to Kathy Gallucci to get us started. And for those of you who are presenting today, you're welcome to turn your video off for now if you'd like. And when we get to your section, I'll let you know to turn it back on, and we can do that as well. So thank you. And Kathy Gallucci, you can kick us off.
All right. Thank you, Sam. Welcome, everybody. It's really nice to have you all together. I'm sorry that it's taken a couple months here to get everyone together in a forum. Certainly wanted to make sure that we got together before the holidays are upon us. And wanted to give an update on start by giving an update on the search for the CHRO position. There is a committee that is formed. That committee, I believe, is either working on or has finalized a search committee, or a search company that we will use, and then also putting together the job description for the CHRO position. There's a lot that goes into putting those positions descriptions together. And as I understand it, they're working on that now, and ultimately will engage in the posting and recruitment process shortly. So in the interim, I will be working with all of you, and it's certainly my honor and my pleasure to do so while that search is underway. So just wanted to give you a brief update on that. I do believe that there will be HR representation on the committee. So that is a positive. We want to make sure that we have HR presence in that process. And so certainly we'll be doing that. Want to give you just a brief update on what's going on in HR this week and in the weeks to come. We are launching this week. We have a new sick leave regulation, and that regulation is going to be in effect January 1. And so we are going out with an announcement to all faculty and staff that outlines the regulation and how it impacts our faculty and staff here at the university. By and large, it's a benefit to employees. It establishes a minimum threshold for sick leave coverage. We, in all cases, we actually exceed the new requirement, but it does add new reasons for sick leave as part of this new law. And so there'll be additional reasons that individuals can take sick leave from the university. So that is going out this week. I sent a notice to the cabinet this morning. There'll be a letter to all managers, anyone who manages staff, anyone who manages faculty will receive a summary of the changes, and then there'll be a letter to really all staff. There's a few different versions. The medical center has PTO, and the university has sick leave. So there's a couple of different versions of the letter, but we will get that out. Sam Burkett has been helping to organize all of that, and that will go out to all staff on Thursday after the managers get a little lead time to read the memo. And so we have that going on. We have the Career Path Modernization Project that continues to move forward. I believe that we are still reviewing position descriptions and getting all of those in a good form. And so at our next meeting, maybe we'll have a more thorough update on that project so that everyone can be aware of where we are in the process and how we're doing. And so in terms of updates, the only other thing that I wanted to mention is we've had lots of questions about remote work and the status of remote work and when individuals will be expected to return to the workplace. I think as all of you are probably aware, we have a resurgence in COVID, and so the numbers in Rochester have continued to rise. We do not anticipate that we will be bringing staff back to work before the next fiscal year. But we are kind of finalizing, looking at all of that, and we'll be getting a communication together for other staff across the university to really talk about remote work and what we see in terms of making decisions to return staff. As I said, we're not really in a position to do that right now, and certainly do not see us bringing folks back in January, thinking more along the lines that we'll look at sometime in the new fiscal year, when hopefully the vaccine will be distributed and we start to see things looking up from a COVID perspective. So more to come on that as well. And with that, I actually, Sam, do we have Dr. Branch? Is Dr. Branch here yet?
I don't think she's arrived yet, unless she's on and I missed her.
All right.
But actually what we can kind of just discuss quickly is throughout the presentation today, if you have any questions, we may not have time to answer them today. We're going to try, if we can, throughout the presentation to handle questions. But we promise that if we don't get to them during the presentation, we will follow up afterward. So if you can chat any questions you might have during the town hall today into the chat to the panelists or to Patrina Owens, who will be helping with that. And then we will try to, like I said, try to answer them or certainly get back to you with any questions that you may have. So I think we're just waiting on Dr. Branch. Is there anything else, Kathy, that you wanted to cover?
Actually, if we're waiting for Dr. Branch, I might actually put Michelle Hill on the spot and ask her to do a brief update on the Career Path Modernization Project. Or Sonia, if Sonia is here.
No, sorry. I was trying to unmute myself and I got an error message that said that I couldn't do it without the host or something. So, you know, technology is not my thing. So yes, the project is moving along quite well. As you said, Kathy, the project team is working with the business partners who are working with the various department leads throughout the organization to update job descriptions. And so I actually have not seen the updated numbers this week, but I understand that there was quite a bit of activity last week. And so our numbers are improving as far, I shouldn't say improving, are increasing as far as the number of job descriptions that have been completely updated and are now ready to submit to Mercer, who is our outside consultant, who will use those to assist them in the job architecture that they are developing on behalf of the university.
Great. Thank you, Michelle. I appreciate that. It looks like we have a question in the chat. The question is, since remote working seems to be going so well, is it being considered to keep this as a permanent way of working? We actually have developed a remote work policy. We developed it, it's been approved. And so we do believe that there will be opportunities to discuss positions that may work out well for permanent remote work. And so there'll be a process to review those different positions. And ultimately, we'd like to have that denoted in the job description, that the position is certainly something that could be considered for permanent remote work. So certainly is something that we've talked about for a really long time. And then I think COVID has kind of sped up our process related to looking at remote work in general. And I know a lot of employers are certainly looking at the various options as well. So certainly something that we will consider. Are there other questions?
Well, I think maybe what we'll try to do is flip-flop our agenda a little bit while we are waiting for Dr. Branch. I know she's very busy right now, so I'm sure she's just tied up in something. So why don't we go actually onto the employee recognition and talk a little bit about some of our new employees and some ways that our employees have been recognized. And then we'll see from there where we're at, and maybe we can even cover HR Connect early and then get to our presentation second. So I will share my screen here. And actually, Kathy, I think these start with you, are some of our new employees that you will be willing to introduce.
Yes. So we are going to start with new employee introductions. I want to introduce Gretchen Baumer. Gretchen is a new associate director in HR operations at the medical center. She replaces Peg Lee, who retired at the end of October. And so Gretchen is joining us. Gretchen has many years of experience in actually healthcare. She came from Highland Hospital, and her assignment is focused on nursing and the entire nursing operations. And she certainly has that experience from Highland Hospital, so we're thrilled to have her here. Also joining us, Kim Phelps is a new HR business partner and has excellent HR experience, as well as it's Nicola Burrows is her formal name. She goes by Nikki. She is an HR business partner also. Both Kim and Nikki come with great experience. They're both in the medical center. Kim will be assigned in nursing. We're still working on her specific assignment. Nikki is actually taking on the Children's Hospital, which might have those of you who know Jamie Lynn Bradley asking what happened to Jamie Lynn. Well, Jamie Lynn, if Sam, you just go to the next slide, has been promoted to senior HR business partner as of 11/1/20. She will be a senior HR business partner at the medical center, specifically in emergency medicine and critical care. And she will continue to work with Nikki in the Children's Hospital. And Ashley Negron from nursing has also been promoted to a senior HR business partner as of 11/1/20. She will remain in nursing but take on her new duties there as well. So we are thrilled to have these promotions, and if you get a chance, please make sure that you congratulate these folks as we move forward. I'm going to do a recognition, and then I'm going to let some of the directors talk about their specific individuals. Ashley Campbell was recognized this past week as a Rochester Business Journal 40 Under 40 recipient on November 12th. She was recognized for this, and this is really for outstanding professional achievements and work in the community. The individuals are actually selected by previous 40 Under 40 winners. And so it's a great honor, and we want to congratulate Ashley, and certainly she has achieved a lot, and I'm sure will continue to achieve as she moves on in her career in human resources. And so now I'm going to turn it over, I think, to Michelle, and she's going to talk a little bit about folks in her group. Maybe. You know what? I will go ahead.
Oh, I'm sorry. Again, I'm on mute. I'm sitting here chatting away. I apologize, guys. I hate that I don't have my video so that you can't see my lips moving and say, Michelle, you forgot that you're on mute. So Sonia Garlington has joined the Office of Total Rewards October 12th as the new Director of Compensation. And so I know a number of you have already met Sonia virtually, and will continue to do so until we're back in the office. Sonia joins us actually from the University of Maryland at Baltimore County. And then everybody knows and loves Leah Stormo-Souls, and Leah is now part of the Office of Total Rewards and has accepted the position of the project manager. And it's actually the project manager for HR, but because the main project she is working on right now is our Career Path Modernization Project, she is pretty much focused on work within the Total Rewards, but as new initiatives come down the pipeline from within HR, Leah will be the project manager that will be managing all of those for HR. Exciting that we received leadership acknowledgement of that crucial role.
Excellent. And then next,
This is Kathy Miner.
Hello, I'd like to introduce another Gretchen, and the other Gretchen and I had some chuckles about me confusing this Gretchen and her. They're both new, and I told her Gretchen is the new Kathy around here. There's getting to be more and more Gretchen. Gretchen Lipinski is here with us covering for liaison position. She started very recently in November, on November 3rd. And Janelle Thomas is also helping us with the liaison role through Strong Staffing, and she started with us in October, on October 26th, and they are a great help because we are experiencing a surge in hiring, so we are very pleased to have them on board.
very good. I think we are now going to do a little service recognition, Sam.
Yes, that's correct. So Kathy, if you want to just take these away real quickly, they're up on the screen of who is celebrating some really great service anniversaries this year.
Yeah, this is wonderful. So we've got Denise Vallone at 20 years of service, Sandra Monachino at 15 years of service, Tom Dunbar from Total Rewards, 15 years of service, Dan Gibson, also 15 years, and Erica Owens at 10 years of service. Thank you all for your dedicated years here at the University of Rochester. This is really exceptional to see this many people celebrating service anniversaries, and we just really want to thank you for all of your contributions over the years.
Excellent. And then actually, I think we'll have Melanie Williams. If she is available, I think Mel, you can turn on your audio now and hopefully can talk a little bit about our new adventure in HR Connect. Mel, are you there?
I am. Hi. So I'm Melanie Williams. I'm the Benefits Analytics Coordinator in Total Rewards, and I just want to tell everyone about our new HR Connect community. So this is just a quick screenshot of what it looks like. So with the new pandemic protocol, we just can't say hello in the break room anymore, you know? So this is a new way that we can get to know each other even in this remote world. We wanted to unite the larger HR group with a place to gather virtually. So we are now using a new MyPath module to do this. How do you get there? Well, first you'll go into MyPath, and there you should see the UR Connect in that upper menu. If you hover over UR Connect, you'll see UR Connect Communities. Then you will click on that, and from there you can go to the HR Connect Communities, what you see here. So inside there, you'll find 6 topics, as you can see, for your enjoyment. That Bright Spots folder is a place to share your good news and positive stories, which is something we definitely need today, right? The Fun and Games folder gives you a chance to compete with your coworkers and even learn a few things as well. Right now, if you go in there, there's a post that will help you learn the NATO phonetic alphabet, because we all need that, right? Or you can try the word scramble that's in there, or you can play remote work bingo. So check it out, you'll see it's fun. The member board folder will allow you to share ideas and get and give advice. The swaps and such folder contains recipes, and it also provides a place to exchange items and ideas. The basics folder offers help with using HR Connect. And last but certainly not least is the wellness folder. This is a place that will help you in keeping you healthy, both physically as well as mentally. And now, as your HR Connect team, we have solemnly vowed to keep these folders new and interesting with frequent updates, but we do need you to keep the conversations going, right? So if you have any ideas or suggestions, you can post them in that member board folder, and we will check it out, and we will, work on getting those things implemented. So we hope you enjoy connecting with the HR community, and we will see you online.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Excellent. Well, I think we are now joined by Dr. Branch, so I'm going to turn it over to Kathy Gallucci to do an introduction.
So we are incredibly fortunate to have Dr. Angela Branch joining us today. Dr. Branch is an assistant professor at the University of Rochester School of Medicine. She currently has clinical inpatient practice comprised of both general infectious diseases and HIV medicine patients. Dr. Branch is also a New York State designated HIV/AIDS provider and has a practice comprised of adult patients ages 18 and older at the URMC HIV clinic. During her years at the University of Rochester, her focus in research involved the use of viral, molecular, and immunological diagnostic assays to explore the pathogenesis and host response to acute viral respiratory illnesses in adults. She is currently the clinical director of the NIH Center for Excellence in Influenza Research and Surveillance, New York Influenza Center of Excellence, and co-principal investigator for the UR Vaccine Treatment and Evaluation Unit. Current efforts include the study of the pathogenesis and immune response to the pandemic SARS coronavirus 2 infections and clinical interventional trials for the development of COVID-19 therapeutic agents and vaccines. She is a member of the Infectious Disease Society of America and the NIH Human Cohort Steering Committee and NIH IDCRC Emerging Infectious Expert Working Group. We are so thrilled to have you today, Dr. Branch, and thank you for joining us. We know that you're incredibly busy, but are really excited to receive an overview of what you've been working on and how we will move forward. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I'm so sorry I was late. We're having a busy day vaccinating people today, but I'm happy to join you and just share with our U of R HR community what's happening here at the University of Rochester to help develop COVID vaccines. So I'm going to share my screen now. Okay. All right. Can you see that?
We sure can.
Okay, great. So I'm going to talk about what we've been doing for the last 8 months, which is focusing on rapidly developing a vaccine to combat the COVID-19 pandemic. So as many of you know, and some of this data is actually a little bit outdated, the pandemic has been causing a lot of disease across the world and here in the United States. Since the SARS coronavirus 2 was first identified in December 2019 in Wuhan, China. To date, we've had about 52 million infections in the world and 1.3 million deaths. And here in the United States, we just crossed the 11 million case mark. And interestingly enough, the last million cases have been within the last 7 days, which is much faster than it took us to get to 10 million. There have been a little bit more than 240,000 deaths here in the United States. And then here in New York, we've had about 114,000 cases. A lot of that was in the spring and early summer. And since then, we've tapered off very nicely in New York, although case rates are increasing, and we are now headed towards an increase in cases both locally as well as statewide. In Rochester, we've had a little bit under 6,000 cases. And again, this data is really outdated. This was as of the end of September. Recently, cases have actually quadrupled here in Monroe County within the last week, and the numbers are probably significantly higher, although we're still waiting for a report from the Department of Health. And then, unfortunately, our case fatality rate here in Rochester is about 5%. which is slightly higher than the national average of about 2 to 3%. And this may have to do with just the people that are being infected and affected here in Rochester. We had a lot of nursing home outbreaks in the spring, which is a very frail and group that for which fatality related to viral illnesses is particularly high. And just to put it in perspective, because I think, you know, it's still hard to kind of grasp the scope of what this means. 51 million cases sounds like a lot to me, but it really looks like a lot when you consider what the number, how influenza and pneumonia typically causes attack rates here in the United States. So this is what we call the seasonal baseline of the number of infections due to influenza, pneumonia, and other viruses every winter season. This in 2018 was a particularly bad season. 2019 was sort of at baseline here. And then you come to 2020, you see this huge, huge spike, well above average of what we typically see. And one of the things about COVID is that we're seeing spikes that are not necessarily related to temperature, the way typically you see more pneumonia and influenza deaths in the winter time. And this is some of the Monroe County data that is shared with us. This is provided by the Center for Community Health and Prevention, working with the Emergency Infections Program, which is part of the CDC surveillance. And as you can see, they give us the number of cases. They help us to understand rates of hospitalization, which is about 16% of the cases, how many people who are hospitalized end up in the ICU, so about a quarter of those, and then the case fatality rates or the number of deaths, which is around 5%, as I mentioned earlier. And then they also give us something like this, which helps us to track how cases are trending, the number of tests that are positive. In the lower part of the state, they're working with this idea of when we hit the 3% positivity mark, then we know that things are really surging. But we actually here in Monroe County have the exact number of cases, so we can track every 3 days or so whether cases are rising. This was sort of our best period of the year so far. And since then, in the last week or so, these cases have actually quadrupled. So we're actually kind of closer up to here in terms of the number of positive tests we're seeing every couple of days. And it's not necessarily an equal opportunity offender, COVID. It is disproportionately affecting adults over the age of 65. And so a lot of the fatality we're seeing are in older adults. And as I mentioned, patients in nursing homes are a particular risk. And it also has a racial and ethnic bias to some extent, with higher proportion of cases in our African American and Latinx citizens compared to their white counterparts. So how do we get out of this mess? You know, there's been a lot of sort of theorizing and postulating, and different countries are doing different things. Different scientists are proposing different things, but what it comes down to is two possibilities. The first is something called herd immunity, and the second is vaccination. So I'll tell you a little bit about what each of those things mean. So this is how we explain how you halt a pandemic. So the two people in red here are people who are infected that are in a community. Everybody in blue are those that are healthy, they've never been infected, and they have no immunity. So this is what COVID is like right now. We're dealing with a pathogen to which we are all completely naive, because it's a brand new pathogen to brand new infection to human populations. None of us have any pre-existing protection or immunity against the virus. So when you have a couple of people in a population that's entirely naive, meaning they have no immunity, no protection against the virus because they've never seen it before, then everybody's at risk. And so if you were to allow transmission to just continue to progress through a population, what you'd end up with is a situation like this, where everybody becomes infected over time, and now they all have immunity, and so transmission slows down and even halts. Because everyone around you is now protected. But if you were to allow this situation to progress, which is what you call natural herd immunity, then here in the United States, we would expect millions of people to die. If you can imagine, to achieve this, you would need about 75 to 80% of the population to become infected over time. And if in Monroe County, which has a population of 800,000 people, we allowed this to progress naturally, then we would need about 600,000 people to have been infected over time. And with a case fatality rate of 5%, that might mean as many as 30,000 people here in Monroe County alone could die. That means that every single family would be affected. And here in the United States, we would expect that millions of people would die. So this is generally not a strategy that's been accepted by the scientific community in general, just to prevent the loss of life. So what happens if you vaccinate people? Well, again, you have the same two people here who are infected, and you have a naive population, but now you've vaccinated a ton of the population, which are these people in yellow. And so again, even though you still have a few infections that are circulating, everyone around them pretty much is immune, so transmission isn't allowed to proceed. And under this circumstance, we would expect that only 200,000 to 500,000 people here in the United States would die. So clearly this is a far preferable option to this, which is the very unknown and potentially dangerous path that we could take without the invention of vaccines, effective vaccines. So a little bit about the coronavirus, just to frame our conversation of vaccination. So there actually are there are actually hundreds of strains of coronaviruses. Some infect humans, some infect animals like bats and chicken and poultry and camels and all sorts of other animals. There are 4 strains that typically circulate in human populations every winter and cause seasonal respiratory illnesses, mostly colds. Occasionally you can get pneumonia from some of them. People that are immunocompromised tend to have pneumonias and more severe illnesses. And those are the strains here in black. In the last 20 years, there have been the emergence of 3 new strains which have been shown to cause more severe illnesses. The first one is the severe acute respiratory syndrome coronavirus, or SARS coronavirus 1, which emerged in 2002 and 2003 in China, and that's one of these here. This actually caused small epidemics in China, but it did not transmit from one person to another very severely. The thing that was most startling about this particular coronavirus is that the fatality of the people infected was almost 50%. So we were very concerned when this emerged in 2002 and 2003, and it actually set up a lot of research and development that led to the rapid development of the vaccines that we're currently testing. But fortunately, this virus didn't seem to be able to transmit from person to person, so it never became a pandemic. The second is the Middle Eastern Respiratory Syndrome coronavirus, MERS-CoV, which emerged in 2012 in Saudi Arabia. Unlike SARS-1, this one actually does transmit from person to person, but is much less lethal than SARS-1. And for some reason, even though it does transmit, it doesn't transmit efficiently enough to really have significant pandemic potential. And so while there's been outbreaks of this in the Middle East every season since it first emerged, it has never spread worldwide. And then we had the 2019 novel coronavirus, SARS coronavirus 2, which genetically is most similar to this one, but has been modified so that it actually does transmit from person to person, which has led to the current pandemic. So this is a cartoon of what a coronavirus looks like. And I'm not going to get into the detail of the structure of the virus, except to point out one thing. And that's these little yellow things that are sticking out the surface of the coronavirus. This is called a spike glycoprotein. And in fact, all coronaviruses have this spike protein. And it's really essential because it's actually the part of the virus that attaches to human cells. So again, here's a cartoon of the coronavirus. Here are the spike proteins here. And here is a human cell, like the cells that line our respiratory tract in our noses, in our major airways, and going down to our lungs. And those cells have this receptor on the surface called the ACE2 receptor. And that's where the coronavirus, as it enters the body through the nasal passages, will attach onto human cells here through this receptor. And that attachment allows the virus to enter into the cell, and now the cell is infected. And that infection cycle creates more viruses, which are then continue to go on to infect more cells and go all the way down the respiratory tract into the lungs, and that's how you get pneumonia. So the idea behind all of the coronaviruses, all of the COVID-19 vaccines is, what if you could block that necessary step? What if you could prevent that spike protein from attaching to that receptor, and you prevent the virus from entering the cell, and then you stop infection in its path, so that anybody exposed, they might still inhale the virus, but the virus would never actually have a chance to infect cells and cause disease. And so the idea behind all the vaccines is, what can we do? How can we generate an immune response which blocks this critical step? How do we create antibodies which prevent this from happening? So the goal of a vaccine, you know, a lot of people think we vaccinate people, a lot of lay people who are not in our profession think you vaccinate someone and the vaccine stays in your body and that's what's actually protecting you. And that's something I think we have to combat, because it's what leads to a lot of vaccine hesitancy. But really the goal of a vaccine is actually to mimic a natural response that the body has when it's infected. And so if you're naturally infected with the COVID-19 virus, after you've been infected, your body develops antibodies and other immune responses which protects you from being infected in the near future. And so the goal of the vaccine is to mimic that same response without actually having you to be infected. And it does it by two ways. It induces a type of cells called B cells to produce antibodies. And what those antibodies do is that they would, in theory, bind to the spike protein like they are here. Here is the coronavirus. These little orange things are a spike protein. Here are antibodies coming and binding to the surface and blocking the spike protein from being able to attach onto cells. And in that sense, the virus is what we call neutralized, because it can no longer infect the cell. The other part of the immune response that you try to stimulate with a vaccine is that you also want to induce different kinds of immune cells called T cells to circulate and to find any virus that might have escaped this particular part of the immune response. So if a virus somehow escapes the antibody response and actually does go ahead and infect the cell, then the T cells circulate and they find those virus-infected cells and they destroy them before the virus can make more copies of itself and go on and infect additional cells. So when this all started about 8 months ago, I remember I was on WWXI and they were asking me if we thought a vaccine could be ready by the end of the year. And I said no way, because no one had ever in the history of man invented a vaccine in 8 months. And this was April of this year. And it sort of felt like the efforts were like this, just a lot of darts being thrown at a dartboard. But it's actually coalesced around really simple, elegant science. And one of the things that I think causes a lot of disconcertment when we talk about vaccines is the speed at which this is happening. The speed at which this is happening. Typically, a vaccine takes about 10 years from the time it is first discovered until it is licensed. And so how are we able to do this in 1 year? Well, remember I talked about SARS coronavirus 1 and the MERS coronavirus and how that set off a lot of research and development as far back as 2002. Well, that's actually allowed us to develop technology and knowledge about how to develop a vaccine against coronaviruses that has been leveraged to speed up this process. Typically, the first 7 years of vaccine development is in this preclinical phase before we even put it in humans, where we're trying to modify and optimize the product in animal models that gives us data as to safety, as to the right dose, is it protective, does it give you the right immune response, all those different things that you really want to optimize before you do a first-in-human clinical trial. So a lot of that was actually done for MERS and for SARS-1 way before this novel coronavirus emerged. And so you could just adapt this, what you already knew, to this new SARS coronavirus 2, and then rapidly develop a product that you can move through clinical trials. So there's 3 phases. There's phase 1, which is the part that we vaccinate about 100 people, and we look really intensely to see if any of them develop any side effects that would make this vaccine something that we would consider unsafe to continue developing. And then there's phase 2, where we vaccinate about 1,000 people. And again, it's really the major outcome is to look for safety, but you're also wanting to show that it does produce an immune response that potentially could be protective. And then you're optimizing the dose you need to give that balances the minimum amount of side effects with the best immune response. And then if you have something that makes it through phase 1 and phase 2, which are typically in very healthy people that have no underlying medical conditions, then you test it in the general population in phase 3. And this tends to be tens of thousands of people, and it's usually placebo controlled so that you can understand if the vaccine is actually effective or not. So here at the University of Rochester, we've been participating in all phases of developing COVID vaccine trials for multiple different vaccines. So there are currently 6 vaccines that have been identified by the NIH for development and for here in the United States. Those are the Moderna RNA vaccine, the Pfizer RNA vaccine, the AstraZeneca, which is a viral vector vaccine, similarly the Janssen or Johnson & Johnson viral vector vaccines, and then 2 vaccines, Novavax, developed by Novavax, and Sanofi Pasteur, which are protein-based vaccines. And of those, we've been participating in trials for 4 of them. The Pfizer, we did phase 1, 2, and 3. AstraZeneca, we're currently enrolling in the phase 3 trial. Sanofi, we participate in phase 1 and 2, and we're currently enrolling in phase 3. And Novavax and Janssen, we hope to participate in their vaccine studies for children. So these 6 vaccines are generally fall into 3 ways of making vaccines. And so remember I mentioned that it sort of seemed like throwing darts at the dartboard, but it actually coalesced into very specific science that I think is pretty simple to understand and targets the right thing. And so the 3 ways the vaccine are being made is, the first is using what we call messenger RNA. And this is how the Pfizer and the Moderna vaccines are being made. So remember that spike protein I showed you guys earlier, which is the part of the coronavirus that binds to human cells and allows the virus to attach and cause infection? Well, what these vaccines does is that it takes the gene of that spike protein and it delivers the gene as the vaccine with some instructions for the body to make spike protein. So this gene is delivered, your body makes the spike protein in its natural form, and even though the spike protein can't hurt you, your body recognizes that it's foreign and it's not something that's not supposed to be there, and develops an immune response against the spike protein, specifically antibodies that will bind to the spike protein, as well as that important T cell response, which will allow the destruction of virus-infected cells. So that's how the Pfizer and the Moderna vaccines are made. They are both messenger RNA vaccines, which is, again, delivery of the gene with instructions. The second way that vaccines are being made, and this is how the AstraZeneca and the Johnson & Johnson Janssen vaccines are being made, is to use a vector. And a vector is sort of like a Trojan horse approach. We use a virus that has been engineered not to cause infection and not to be able to make more copies of itself in your body as a delivery system. And what it's delivering is the same thing. It's delivering the spike protein gene with instructions for the body to make spike protein. Now, the delivery system that these vaccines are using is a different virus called an adenovirus. And adenovirus sometimes can cause cold, sometimes they live in your colon and do nothing at all. But again, the adenovirus has been engineered, so all it's doing is delivering this protein, and then it gets swept away by your sort of your body's garbage disposal system, so to speak. And so all you're left is with this gene, which instructs your body to make spike protein and again, develop an immune response against the spike protein. And then the third way the vaccines are being made, and this is how the Sanofi and the Novavax vaccines are being made, is just to make synthetic spike protein in a lab, in a petri dish, and then package that in some way in the vaccine and deliver the protein itself, and then again to trigger that immune response against the spike protein. So all pretty much similar in that it's targeting the same thing, just different ways of delivering the spike protein to the body to stimulate an immune response. So how do we know that a vaccine may be a good candidate for development? Well, I'll give you an example from the AstraZeneca Oxford vaccine. So what we'll get in phase 1 is data that looks like this. For each patient, we will get a readout that tells us how many of them had side effects and what kind of side effects they had. So this is a cumulative map of the side effects that were reported from the AstraZeneca phase 1 study. If you see dark red, that means they've been hospitalized because of their side effect. If you see just regular red, then again, it's severe but not hospitalized. So we don't like to see anything that looks like red or dark red. You want to see yellow, which is mild, and you want to see this peach, a few peaches, which is moderate. And you look at everything from the kinds of symptoms they have: chills, fever, fatigue, headache, any weird neurological symptoms, any muscle aches, and you want to basically see that there is some reactogenicity. People are mounting an immune response, and that's why they do have some mild symptoms, but that everything is mild. The next thing we look at is we look to see what kind of immune response are they developing against the virus. So here again is the AstraZeneca virus vaccine. Here's people at day 0 before they get vaccinated. And along the y-axis is sort of their antibody levels. And along the x-axis is days. And so day 0, and each dot represents a single person. So this is a group of about 40 people. And you look to see, you want to see nobody having antibodies. So for the most part, no one had any antibody levels at day 0. And then you look 28 days after they get their vaccine, does the antibody levels rise? And you do see a rise in some people, but not everyone. And so that's why we decided to give a second dose, and you look after that at day 35 and day 42. So this is 14 and 28 days after that second dose. And what you want to, 7 and 14 days after that second dose. And what you want to see is that the antibody levels have all risen and that they're staying high. And then you compare that to what happens in people who are naturally infected, which is the green here. So these are people who got COVID on their own, and then they developed antibodies that are now protective. And you compare that antibody response to what you're seeing with vaccine. And if it kind of looks like it's on the same level, then you know that you have a vaccine that potentially will create an immune response that's as protective as if you'd gotten naturally infected. So then how do we know that a vaccine works? Well, I'll show you what happened with Pfizer. You guys might have seen the Pfizer and the Moderna results. So Pfizer is showing about 90% efficacy, and Moderna is doing even better than that at 94.5% efficacy. So we're all super excited about those results that were published within the last week. So the Pfizer study had about 44,000 participants, and people were randomized 1-to-1 to receive either placebo or vaccine, so half in the placebo arm, half in the vaccine arm. And then you do illness surveillance, and you see how many people got infected in the placebo arm versus those in the vaccine arm. And Pfizer wrote it into their protocol that they would do an interim analysis at a certain number of illness, because statistically that will tell you if the vaccine's effective or not. So when they got to 94 illnesses, they did their interim analysis, and then in their interim analysis, they found that the vast majority of the illnesses were in the placebo arm, and there were only a few illnesses in the vaccine arm, and that allows you to conclude that the vaccine is 90% effective. And those are similar to what has happened in the Moderna study and what will happen with all of the following vaccine studies. So I'm just going to stop there with one last slide so we can have a few minutes for question, and that will be something that's on everybody's mind, which is how we will ensure fair and equitable distribution of vaccines to high-risk populations. and when will vaccine actually be available. So this is the vaccine plan that was published by HHS, and I think it's pretty good information. And so Moderna has promised that at the end of the year, they will have roughly 20 million doses of vaccine. With a 2-dose schedule, that means roughly 10 million people may be able to be vaccinated by the end of the year if those vaccines are in fact available. But remember, vaccine has to go from the company, and the manufacturing is always more optimistic than it turns out to be. So it has to go from the company's manufacturing plant to HHS, to state governments, to local governments, to local hospital practices and pharmacies. And so the likelihood that that'll happen before the end of the year is a little low, I think. I think it's more likely that vaccine will start to reach us sometime early next year. How early, it sort of depends on how efficient we are doing something we've never ever done in our lives, or in in the history of modern medicine. But theoretically possible. And so in phase 1, the healthcare workers would be the first people to become vaccinated. And then in phase 1B, you would have other essential workers as well as people at higher risk for COVID illnesses, including older adults. So this will be the period from January to probably late spring when there's potentially limited doses of vaccine available. Now, this will all depend on how quickly we can we can study and develop all these other vaccines, because the more choices we have, the higher the availability. Then we'll move into phase 2, and I think this will probably be in the summer, maybe late summer, when the remainder of phase 1B populations are vaccinated. Any other critical populations, such as minority groups that are high risk in the general population. And then you move into phase 3, which will be late fall and into next year, when there's now sufficient supply of vaccine, and we just have to go around and try to get everybody to be vaccinated. All this taken into account that in the most recent survey, only 50% of Americans said that if there was an available vaccine, they would actually take it. So it may be that this phase 3 has the greatest impact as the area that will have to do the greatest amount of work. And I'll stop there and take a few minutes for questions.
Thank you, Dr. Branch. If anyone has questions, feel free to chat the panelists and we will answer them.
Dr. Branch, I have a question for you while we're waiting for other people who may have questions to type. In terms of, you mentioned, I think that one vaccine was 90% effective and the other was 94%. Is there an opportunity to close the gap between the two vaccines? And do you think that when they ultimately distribute, if they're all available, will people have choice in terms of which vaccine they get?
I think that the Pfizer vaccine is 90+ effective, and I think that the difference between the 90 and 94% may be one illness. So the numbers are too small for it to actually be significant. I think any vaccine that's 90+ effective or better, you can assume they're equitable. And I think most of these will get close to that. So I wouldn't necessarily at this point say one vaccine is better than the other. In terms of choice, I think that Pfizer is operating outside of Operation Warp Speed, so they may not necessarily have the same mandate to provide doses to the United States that some of these other vaccine companies, which are within Operation Warp Speed, do. So I think availability will depend on the contract that they have with the United States government. And I think it'll also depend on how fast they can ramp up manufacturing. The Moderna vaccine can be made very quickly, but Moderna is a very small biotech company. They've never brought a vaccine to market. So that's going to limit what they can do. I think the Johnson & Johnson and the AstraZeneca vaccines are made in a way that they know how to make them. They just take longer to do. So there's so many different factors that are in play that I don't think we're going to have a lot of choice. I think whatever's available, I would strongly encourage people to go and get that vaccine.
We do have a couple questions that have come in. One of them is, will the vaccine be mandated by U of R or anyone else? Do you think will be required to get the vaccine?
I don't know the answer to that question. You probably know that better than I do. But I can't imagine that for people who work in the hospital with patients that it won't be mandated.
Will there be a different vaccine for children?
No, all of these will eventually start studying vaccines in children. The first will be the Johnson & Johnson, but Pfizer has also started studying the vaccine in adolescents 12 to 18 years old.
For those who received the vaccine and did become ill, were their symptoms less severe, or were they similar to those who had the placebo?
We don't actually know the answer to that. They haven't gotten that granular in their analysis as yet, but I'll be very interested to know that as much as you. I would hope that would be true.
If given only 50% of individuals indicate that they would get the vaccine, do you have any suggestions of how we can educate the general public to convince them that this is the right move?
Yeah, I think we have to keep talking a lot to educating people on how these vaccines are made, on why we think they're safe, on how we determine if they're effective or not. I think that there's just a lot of concern about the politicization of this whole process and that it's moving too rapidly. And we're in the middle of a pandemic, so you can't go slow. But I think the more scientists and the more healthcare professionals that are out there telling people that it's going quickly, but safety is not being sacrificed, I think the more convincing it will be.
We'll just do one or two more. One question is, does COVID have any direct threat to blood safety or general blood supply?
I don't actually know the answer to that. I think some people that are COVID positive are found to be viremic, meaning you can detect the virus in their blood sample. How much that compromise, how often that is, and whether it depends on the severity of symptoms and if it'll compromise blood supply, I don't think we know the answers to that.
And we'll just take one more, and that is, do we know how long vaccines are expected to be effective once you get them?
No, that's also a really good question. So even after we've proven efficacy of these vaccines, we'll actually have people participating in the studies stay in the studies for up to 2 years so that we can track how quickly their immunity wanes. The immunity will wane, that's a guarantee. But whether it's within a year or 2 years is something that we don't know yet.
Excellent. Thank you, Dr. Branch.
Dr. Branch, we would really like to thank you. It's really exciting to have our own organization that's involved in the process, and certainly very thankful for you and your colleagues and all you're doing to ultimately end this pandemic. So thank you so very much.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. Take care, everyone.
Okay, and Kathy, if you want to turn it over to our financial experts who are here, I will share my screen and we can start with their presentation.
So I believe Liz Malovic, am I saying that right, Liz? I always get your last name wrong.
It's okay, Kathy. It's Malovic.
Malovic.
Yeah.
So Liz is our Associate Vice President for Financial Operations and the University Controller. And Adam is our Senior Vice President and CFO at the Medical Center. And Liz and Adam are going to give us a financial update. You know, we've been going through certainly a lot with COVID over the last few months. And as you all know, there's been lots of changes. We implemented austerity measures, and we've had a lot of questions about where are we, and and how are we doing in terms of getting back to where we need to be financially. So Liz and Adam are going to talk a little bit about that.
Great. I think I'm going to kick it off, Kathy. I'm going to take the group just very quickly through our year-end results. So we do have a June 30th year-end, and we just completed the audit with Pricewaterhouse as our auditors. We did the entire audit remotely this year, so our staff as well as the auditing staff. So at the end of the day, we had a positive, clean audit, so which was huge kudos to those who worked on it. Having to had transitioned very quickly in March, we had to be ready for a year-end audit with only a few months, and then many of the other activities that we were all doing on top of it. So it was a great audit process and great result at the end. But so what I'm really going to talk to you about very quickly is sort of where we ended the year. And then Adam is going to pick it up and talk specifically about the medical center. And then I'll preface it with, where we ended isn't necessarily where we're going, right? We're still very much in a fluid situation. So these were our financial results. We ended 2020 with $108 million in operating income. That compared to the prior year of 157. Well, that jumps out to say, wow, we certainly don't seem to have done that bad. I will say that we did get a number of CARES grant revenues that contribute to that, and I'll talk through sort of how that impacted our financial statements overall. At the end of the day, we had just a small decrease in our net assets from the prior year of about $2 million. To the next slide. Who's controlling it? Sorry.
I think Sam is running the slide.
Okay.
I am, yeah.
Yeah, so overall, our financial results as a whole, remember, this is the entire entity. So this includes all of the results of the medical center, all of the academic results, all of our affiliate results. So this slide just really breaks down where those dollars are coming from. You can see that the medical center had about $25 million impact to the bottom line. Other divisions, another $29 million, and it breaks down to about $54 million from the university as a whole. And then all of our affiliates, all of our affiliate hospitals had about a $53 million. That $53 million represents a bunch of capital grants that we received that are really just one time in to pay for construction that's ongoing with the construction of a hospital. That really isn't it's just bottom line results. It ends up in our bottom line, even though it really didn't contribute anything in, it ends up capitalized. So total, as I mentioned, $107 million in operating income. When you look at the university's revenues as a whole, you can see that very big slice of it is hospital and patient care. So when you combine us all together, we've got the majority of our income that comes from our hospital and patient care. That line item alone is $3.5 billion. We have grants and contracts that come in from federal sources as well as other state and government sources. That line item was up some $90 million. That $90 million was really these CARES Act monies that I mentioned that we received. So we did receive provider relief funds of about $118 million. Remember when I showed on that last slide of how we had positive net income? If you would have just taken away those CARES Act funds that we would have received, we would have actually had an operating loss for the year. We did also get some higher ed relief funds on the academic side of the house. Those were offset by other lower university grants. So when you look at our auxiliaries line item, that's another line item that was down from the prior year. We did give back to the students about $14 million in room and board refunds for the year. So that's one of the line items that's actually decreased. Our endowment spending remained probably on par, really almost the same. That's really a percentage of our investments that we take out per year. Not surprisingly, on the gifts and pledges line item, we were down about $20 million. With the impact of, we typically have a big push at year end, fiscal year end for gifts. Obviously, we were in the middle of COVID, so it's not unusual that our gifts and pledges line item is down about $20 million, as we typically have that revenue come in right at the end of the fiscal year, and then a small decrease in other sources of revenue. On the expense side of the house, the majority of our expenses obviously are our people. So salaries and wages, and then benefits. Salaries and wages is about half. Benefits is another 14%. And then our supplies line item is about 50 million increase. That really fluctuates with the volume that we have at the hospital. So as you can imagine, supplies increases as we have a volume on the hospital side. We did have our compensation, even though it's up, we did do a 2% salary and wage program at the prior year. So remember, the results that I'm talking about are actually the ones that ended June 30th. So it started out with everyone having received that 2%. Then we did, through March and through the end of the year, we did institute the furloughs as well as other salary reductions, and then freezing of open positions. So we had some impact there that helped actually that line item not be so high during the year. On the business and professional line, there's a $6.7 million increase there. That would have been a much higher increase had we not done all the other austerity measures that we mentioned. Some things happened naturally, of course. People weren't able to travel. No travel expense, no conference expense. Lots of decreases in the catering line item as well. And then we estimate, you can't really see it in the financial results because they were not really expenses that we had, but we estimated both the medical center side and the university side about a $97 million savings related to those items. And then we are working separately on a project to go through our dollars and see what we can recover from FEMA. That's going to be a complex and arduous process, but we do have a separate project and a separate group that's working through that. Just very quickly on the balance sheet side of the house, one of the things that we track, and obviously that we track very closely, is the cash position of the university. Even though this looks like it's up a lot from the prior year, about 337 million up, we did receive CMS advances, so monies on the Medicaid side of the house that do have to be paid back. So we have those dollars in cash at the end of the year, but we will be needing to pay those back, as well as we had taken advantage of the ability to defer our tax payments to the federal government related to Social Security tax that we collect on behalf of employees. We don't have to make those payments until next December, so we are also holding cash related to that. That will eventually have to come out. Overall, on the asset side, we are up really due to that cash position mostly, as well as some other line items that actually cancel out on the liability side of the house, so up 8% in assets. I mentioned that employer share of Social Security tax, that did bring to us about $34 million that we do have recorded as a liability. The $199 million that I mentioned on the Centers from Medicare and Medicaid that we have to pay back in advances shows up in our third-party settlement line item. And then our affiliates did apply for the Paycheck Protection loans. That was about $12 million. We'll go through the process, and I did hear just recently that we did have one of those loans at one of our very small affiliates was actually forgiven. So that would be great news if we can actually turn some of those liabilities into pure grants. And then right after we ended the year, it doesn't show up in our financial results, but right after we ended the year, we did do a bond issuance. It was about 350 some million in new money. We did refund some old bonds that we had outstanding for the university. All in all, we had a very favorable rate. It was about almost 3.2% fixed rate for those. And then the large chunk of dollars that we received for that will actually go for strategic projects for the medical center that I'm sure Adam will touch on when we get to his part of the presentation.
Thanks, Liz. I guess I'm up next.
Yeah. Oh, yep.
I was sitting here for the last 10 minutes wondering what we did wrong that Kathy made us go after Dr. Branch. I mean, it's not really fair. No one wants to hear about finances after that good stuff, but we'll give it a shot. So hello, everyone. Just wanted to kind of give you an update on where we are with the medical center. And I thought it's also, it's good to remember back where we were at the end of April in terms of where things were. At that time, we had already curtailed our clinical services pretty dramatically. Our revenue was down about 50% the last half of March, all of April. Our surgical volume was down to, about 22% of what it was versus budget. Our research activities had ramped down. Everything had moved to online learning for the educational side. Most of us were working remotely. This is before we actually furloughed people back in April. We were focused a lot on liquidity, in terms of our balance sheet. Liz went through some of the numbers there, and we were just trying to figure out, what the impact of this was going to be. But at that time, we were modeling out, and we went before our board and said, we're losing $35 million a week. So I wasn't sleeping a lot at the end of April. Fast forward to the next slide, which shows kind of where we wound up at the end of June. This is really a subset of the numbers that Liz just went through. We had been talking about a revenue loss of almost $500 million from March to June. It only wound up being $270 million, so about half of what we were thinking, because we really were able to rebuild our clinical services much quicker than we thought way back in April or even May. So we got to almost 80% of budget in May, around 93% in June, and we've actually been around 100% since that time frame. So we got that, we had that big hit. Almost $200 million of that hit was really a 6-week period from middle of March to end of April. So May and June were not nearly as cataclysmic. Liz talked about the grants, $118 million. So if you think about what did the government do for us, it helped us with about 40% of our loss in terms of the money we got for grants. We got another almost $200 million in advances, like Liz described. Those were supposed to start to be repaid actually back in August. That has since been changed so that we don't have to start repaying that actually until April of 21, and then fully repay that in September of 22. So that's good news in terms of our balance sheet strength. We went through a lot of cost savings measures, as Liz identified, including the furloughs that many people on this call were involved in. And we curtailed our capital spend pretty dramatically. The next slide just shows you kind of what our budget looks like, or where we ended up the year, sorry, before we get to the budget. So on the medical center side, our loss from budget was only $26 million. Again, we were talking about losses in the hundreds of millions of dollars. And this just shows you, again, how we were able to offset that $270 million revenue loss. The $118 million in CARES Act, we recorded $114 million as revenue, $4 million was still deferred. The cost savings line of $85 million, and then all other changes, which was really some of our additional revenue for things like our specialty and contract pharmacy and some of our actual COVID lab testing. So that's kind of the last year's numbers. The next slide, I think, leads into a little bit what we did with 21. And this is something we shared with our board back in September, which was in essence a break-even budget. So on a $4.3 billion budget, in terms of our total revenue and expenses, our operating margin was basically zero, $2 million, break even. Generally, our margin would be around $90 million if we were in a normal scenario here. And that's really what we need to be able to afford all of our strategic investments, including capital. But we went before our board and said, listen, we're not going to hit those numbers this year. Yes, we have some austerity measures in place, but it's going to be a down year for us. And we kind of explained to them how we're going to fund some of our capital. The next slide shows you kind of where we are month by month, and this goes through September now. So I'll just kind of level set with everyone. The orange line is our budget month by month, and it goes from July of 2019 to September of 2020. Again, where our budget was. The yellow line was what would have happened if we got no government support and our volume kind of continued to be down. That's kind of the doomsday scenario. The blue line is actually where we wound up. So that's a combination of all the revenue we got in, including from the government, all the austerity measures we did on the cost side. So we actually did pretty well compared to budget. And you can see really March and April, we were well below budget, and we kind of made up for it in May and June. That July to September number shows you again our margin where we've typically been or where we actually were. The next slide shows you again comparison, just kind of lays things out with the first quarter. We told our board back in June when we were developing the first quarter budget, we were at that time, we were only about 80% back in May. We said, we'd be lucky to get to 90% by the end of September. On a weighted average, we said we'd be around 88%. Well, we wound up being about 100%. So again, anyone on this call who works with the clinical departments knows that we ramped up pretty quickly, and we really, again, did better than we thought we'd be. It led us to having a favorable operating margin of about $64 million, excluding our affiliates in the first quarter, $73 million including our affiliates. We did get some more CARES Act money, Liz and I talked about the $118 million. We got another $13 million in July. We've received nothing additional really since that time. We've applied for additional money. We may hear something next month, but we did get another $13 million in July. Our pharmacy volume has remained very strong. Our lab testing numbers have been really strong. We were on a call with Dr. Smoller last week in pathology. In the month of October, we did 65,000 COVID tests. 65,000 in the month of October. We're blowing beyond that in the month of November. So it's really phenomenal number of tests we're doing. There's some favorable margin to that, not a ton, but it just shows you how busy we are in pathology. And certainly in the first quarter, you know, we got some savings for vacant positions, furloughs, other types of reductions we did. And again, as people on this call know, if you look at the 3,400 people that we furloughed at the medical center, less than 0.1% remained out on furlough by the end of September. So that's good news to see in terms of bringing back our workforce. The next slide just shows it in terms of a chart. Again, we had a margin of almost $50 million top line versus a budgeted loss of $23 million. Again, in a normal year, our margin for the first quarter would be about a quarter of the 90 million I referenced, so about 22 million. So not only did we beat our depressed budget, but we actually did better than we normally would have done. Our revenue was well over budget, again, because we were close to 100%. We got the CARES Act money. And what's interesting, and again, people on this call, I'm sure know this, is in addition to the austerity measures, we had lots of vacancies. So if you look at the salary and benefit underruns, that's versus budget. So all the austerity measures we did in terms of furloughs and salary reductions for our top wage earners, our benefit reductions, all those things were already baked into the budget. But we actually achieved $12 million more than we thought. So we achieved, again, great revenue numbers really at the expense of our staff here. That's not sustainable. I've said that on earlier calls with other groups. I'll say to the HR group, it's not sustainable to have vacancies of that level given the volumes we've seen. The next slide kind of just talks a little bit about, you know, where we think, again, versus last year. So this, again, compared last year, we had a $15 million margin, and it just shows you, again, what drove that variance. Our revenue was basically flat from year to year within $500,000. We got the CARES Act money. Our other revenue, like our pharmacy revenue and lab testing, was well above last year, and then salary and benefits. So again, we achieved the same revenue with lower salaries this quarter. So again, it's really a testament to our workforce here in terms of their ability to do that. The next slide, I think, just gives you some indicators we share with our board this month. It just shows you our inpatient volume, ambulatory surgery volume, lab testing. The blue lines are actual, and the red line is kind of budget. So you can see the bottoming out in April and then bouncing back up. So, you know, we're really well above budget in a lot of these areas. The next line just shows you our ED volume and urgent care. So we can skip over those in the interest of time. So, you know, this is something that, you know, if we look at kind of what we're focused on right now, we got this $200 million advance from the government. We got to pay that back. It's been extended again, like I mentioned, but it still has to be paid back. What we're all very, very worried about now is, you know, what's going to happen with our volume in the second wave or third wave, however you want to look at it. I don't know about you, but anyone on those daily morning command center calls is very problematic. You know, we have almost 100 patients in-house at all of our hospitals now with COVID. The only good news is a lot fewer people in the ICUs, a lot fewer people dying right now, at least. The mortality rate's a lot less, but they're taking up beds. So guess what? You know, call earlier today where we were talking about which elective surgeries are we now going to defer. Haven't had that conversation since May. We're having those conversations now. I will be completely gray if that continues at this point, but it's really worrisome that, you know, not only is the disease kind of progressing through the community, we're seeing that every day, but if we have to start scaling back volume now, there's a financial impact, obviously, but more importantly, if people start deferring care, that's really important. There were some health impacts of that back in March and April. Again, it's one thing for me to talk about the finances. That's actually less important than the impact it has on people delaying care, people not going for their colonoscopies, not going for their mammograms. Very problematic in terms of the health of our community, so I don't want to understate that. We still have a state that has a huge budget deficit. Governor Cuomo has continued to not address it. You know, he's hoping for more support from Washington. I think with President-elect Biden coming in January, they're buddies. I think that's probably a good thing for us in New York State. but we still have a $30 billion deficit. And that could be a 20% cut to us in terms of Medicaid funding is $100 million a year. Hopefully that won't happen and that won't be another hit to the budget, but we have to watch that very closely. University is sending students home next week. We've done a remarkable job of keeping people relatively healthy, but are they going to be able to return in the spring? Liz knows this better than me. If we don't have a spring class here on site, it's a huge financial hit to the university.
Right, and I will say, just to add on to that line item, because we didn't really talk about the first quarter on the academic side of the house, but while we had really the levels of tuition that we had in the past, because we did have more part-time students. Now it varies across the different schools. Some schools definitely took, look not as favorable, because especially with that not having international students here, our costs on the room and board side of the house have really went up, and we have less students there. So we're really incurring losses, parking, we're incurring losses in dining, we're incurring losses on the housing side of the house. So while tuition will look flat, at least for fall, from where we were compared to last year, as Adam said, who knows what the spring will bring us. Amazingly, we were able to get through this semester almost to the very end, but that took a lot of work and a lot of effort. I know folks on this call know that well, and the impact that's had on the staff, right? And just make that the level of care that we need to take in order to get through the semester.
I think great points. And again, when you look at the first quarter, I showed the positive results on a university-wide basis. We're not back 100%, obviously, because the international students are not here, and that creates a financial challenge for us. Maybe jump ahead to the next slide if you can, Sam. So just in terms of some other things there, our ability to maintain the cost-saving levels, again, I would say it's not really reasonable. We're going to maintain those. Yes, we'll be able to save money on travel because no one was traveling for the rest of the academic year. But our vacancy rates and what we're going to be able to do and what we need to do in terms of bringing in travelers for nursing and other areas, that's going to add cost to us. What's going to happen with the remote workforce? Again, everyone on this call is working with departments now. What's it going to look like? Who's coming back? When are they coming back? What do we have to spend to reconfigure the workspace for administrative people? Wage and salary, compression, retirement benefits, all those things people are talking about. When can we restate things? How much are we going to restate? What's going to happen in FY22? Are we going to have a wage and salary program, right? All the things that you guys hear every day, we're hearing as well. But really what it comes down to, it's really the second bullet point here. From a medical center side, we need to be able to retain people and recruit people. The ultimate financial results of the university are very heavily weighted to the medical center now. And, if we can't keep people here to see patients here on the clinical side, overall numbers for the university are not going to look good. So it's really important for us to make sure that we've got the right workforce. And obviously we're challenged in terms of what we can offer people from a salary and benefit perspective now. You guys live it every day. I wanted to just end with some of the capital projects, because one thing that's important to note is we are moving ahead. We're very proud of some of the facilities that opened this year, even during the course of the pandemic. Our new pediatric health and wellness building over on the Al Siegel campus, great building, was funded partially by Tom Golisano and the Golisano Foundation. We have a new downtown mental health services center, right near Eastman Center. It's great. And our new hospital in St. James. Liz talked about the capital grant for that in her numbers, but a great facility down there. So we were actually able to open up major projects this year. And the next couple of slides just show you some of the other ones that will be happening, because we know we need to continue to grow as a medical center and university. Here's our orthopedic campus. The next one is our new ED and inpatient tower. And then actually over at Highland, we have a new expansion there to move to 100% private rooms. So I know, Kathy, I'm kind of out of time, but just wanted to kind of end it there with folks, and glad we had the chance to kind of talk through some of this. I know I was a bit rushed because I know Dr. Branch's stuff was much more interesting, at least to me, than the finances.
So Liz and Adam, no, I think this has been great. I think it's really important for people to understand where we are. And I think you gave a really nice, realistic picture. And I think, the idea here is for people not to understand the nuances of the finances and what we're looking at, but understand that we have an extremely talented finance division at the university, and Adam and Liz and their colleagues in finance have done an incredible job of really projecting what our vulnerabilities are and putting things in place to really counteract that. So I think it's important that people understand, but not be scared. But we just really want you to understand what the nuances are and how we need to kind of look forward to really make sure that we're doing all the things now that safeguard us in the future. And I think, again, I can't say enough how talented our finance division is and how important their work is. They're somewhat unsung heroes in all of this. And I know that I can say that Adam and Liz get very little sleep and rest, whether that be during the weekend or during the week or on the weekends. They've been extremely dedicated to making sure that we are really understanding what our challenges are and that we're able to respond. So I'd like to really thank both of you for joining us. It's been great for you to give us this update, and hopefully you'll come back again in the future. So.
Kathy, and thank everyone on the call
Kathy.
too. You guys
Yeah,
have done a great job through a very challenging year. I'd like to say it's going to get easier soon, but I'd be lying if I said that. So thanks, Kathy, and the group you assembled here too. It's been great to work with you guys.
I agree. Echo what Adam's saying.
Great, thanks so much. So this is really brings us to the end of our forum. I just want to address one thing that came up, maybe two things that came up in the questions before we close. One is related, there was a couple of questions related to mandating the vaccine. You know, we are not at all at a place to really understand what we're going to do related to the vaccine. I think Dr. Branch, you know, really doesn't know, and I don't think we really know. We haven't crossed that bridge yet, but I just want to be clear. I think we just don't know. I think we'll have to understand kind of when we cross that bridge what the public health experts are telling us and go from there. So just something to kind of keep in the back of your mind. And then the other thing related to remote work timeline, and Adam touched upon this, I talked about it a little bit in the beginning. I think we're really not in a position right now to understand exactly what the timeline is for bringing people back from a remote work. We had, I think in our last communication, said we would look at it sometime around October, November to understand January. We've talked as a senior leadership team. We don't believe we're in a place to really estimate when that will be, given that we have a resurgence of COVID right now. So I think we are, you know, fairly certain it won't be in January. We'll look at it again probably February and March, and more than likely it'll be more closely related to the new fiscal year. But again, it kind of depends on what happens with the distribution of the vaccine and what happens with COVID in our community and really across the United States. So really more to come on that, but there'll be no immediate announcement for returning back to work. We have some time before we figure out when that is. So I really want to thank everybody for joining us today. We are interested in hearing about the topics that you would like to learn more about. I think that we had an opportunity to have some pride in the work that we do here at the University of Rochester today, and also to understand better where we stand as an organization from a finance perspective. So happy to have you email me or Sam or Patrina about other topics that you would like to see in the future. And I appreciate you all sticking with us today. I hope that you have a wonderful Thanksgiving and that you have a great rest of this week. Thanks so much.